The message came at 6:14 in the evening, Earth Standard Time. It arrived on every frequency, in every known language, and it hit every communication relay from Mercury to the outer colonies of Neptune. The sender was the Velthari Dominion, 7 alien species bound together under one flag, one military, and one very old hatred for the human race. The broadcast showed Archon Driel, standing on the command bridge of his warship. He was enormous. His body looked like a cross between a mantis and a walking nightmare. Long armored limbs, a head shaped like a blade, and 4 black eyes that reflected no light. Behind him, rows and rows of Velthari soldiers stood perfectly still. The message was simple and heavy with ceremony. 1,000 years ago, we granted mercy to your species, Driel said. His voice was deep and sharp, like stones grinding together. We allowed you to live within your small corner of space. We gave you time. The truce between the Velthari Dominion and the species known as humanity is dissolved. You have 30 standard rotations to surrender your worlds, your fleets, and your weapons. If you do not, we will take them, and we will leave nothing behind. The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, dozens of alien civilizations watched the recording with wide eyes and heavy silence. News channels on the neutral rim began running emergency broadcasts. Analysts for 100 different species said the same thing. Humanity was finished. The Velthari had 500,000 warships. Humanity, as far as anyone knew, had a few thousand aging patrol vessels and some outdated orbital stations. It would not be a war. It would be an execution. On Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, the headquarters of Earth's United Solar Command sat buried beneath 3 kilometers of ice and steel. Deep inside, in the officers' mess hall, Admiral Han Do-hyun was eating soup. He was a man of 53 years, with a calm face and the kind of eyes that looked like they had already seen the end of the world, and decided it was not that interesting. His uniform was neat, but not stiff. His rank pins were slightly crooked. When the broadcast played on the mess hall screen, every officer in the room stopped eating and looked up with pale faces. Do-hyun did not stop eating. He watched the whole thing, slowly finished his bowl, wiped his mouth, and set the spoon down. "Someone send them a receipt, confirming we got it," he said, and add a smiley face. The room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then his aide, a young officer named Baek Juno, let out a short laugh that he immediately tried to cover with a cough. Do-hyun looked at him with a trace of a smile. "Something funny, Lieutenant?" "No, sir," Juno said. "Just, are we not going to panic? Even a little?" Do-hyun said, standing up and straightening his jacket. "There will be a full War Council meeting in 2 hours," he continued. "Until then, everyone finishes their dinner. That is an order." 2 hours later, the War Council gathered in the Deep Room, a vault beneath Titan's surface that was shielded against every form of surveillance known to science, and several forms not yet discovered by anyone else. Around the table sat the highest-ranking humans in the solar system. At the head sat Do-hyun. To his left stood Director No Eunji, the head of Earth's Intelligence Bureau. Eunji was a woman who smiled rarely and knew everything. She had short black hair, sharp cheekbones, and a voice that could make a stone feel nervous. She touched a control panel, and a massive holographic display filled the room. Star maps, fleet positions, troop numbers, supply lines, all of it laid out in perfect detail. It was the Veltharis. "This is the current deployment of every Velthari warship in their dominion," Eunji said. 512,000 vessels spread across 900 systems. Their supply lines run through 4 major choke points, here, 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 and here. Their communication relays use an encryption key that we cracked 260 years ago. And their Supreme Archon, Driel, has a heart condition that his doctors have been hiding from him for the last 11 years. The room was silent. Juno, sitting in the back row as the most junior officer present, felt his mouth fall open slightly. "How long have we had this information?" asked one of the senior admirals. "Which part?" Yunji replied. "We have been monitoring the Velthari continuously for the last 840 years. We knew the war faction would win their internal power struggle approximately 14 months before they voted on it. We have had operational intelligence on every significant military asset they possess for over 3 centuries." She paused and looked around the table. "They think they are starting a war. In reality, they are walking into a museum exhibit that we designed for them." Do-hyun nodded slowly. "Thank you, Director. Now, let us talk about how we end this before it begins." Far from Titan, on a terraformed plain on Mars, an old man sat on the porch of a small house, surrounded by red dust and green gardens. His name was Kwon Tae-soon, and he was 106 years old, though modern medicine made him look no more than 70. He had been a general once. He had fought in the last border skirmish 300 years into the Truce, back when the Velthari tested humanity's defenses and found them surprisingly firm. He had retired 60 years ago and had spent every day since growing vegetables and reading old books. His neighbor, a young farmer named Gil Minho, walked over when the broadcast played on the outdoor holoscreen. Minho's face was tight with worry. "Sir, did you see that? They are coming for us. 500,000 ships. Should we be scared?" Tae-sun leaned back in his chair and looked up at the Martian sky, which had been blue for the last 400 years thanks to human engineering. He let out a small, quiet laugh, the kind of laugh that comes from knowing something that the rest of the world does not. "Scared?" he smiled. "Son, I have seen what is in the vaults beneath Luna. I helped build some of it. Those bugs should be the ones who are scared." He picked up his tea and took a long, slow sip. They have no idea what they just woke up. Across the galaxy, the neutral rim watched and waited. Analysts predicted humanity's fall within weeks. Betting markets on alien trading stations gave humans a 4% chance of survival. News anchors spoke in soft, respectful tones, as if they were already writing humanity's funeral speech. None of them were laughing. But on Earth, on Mars, on Titan, and on every human world, from one end of the Sol boundary to the other, the laughter had already started. It was quiet. It was confident. And it was the most terrifying sound the galaxy had never bothered to listen to. On the Velthari command ship, 3 days before the invasion began, Archon Driel held his final war council. The room was dark and hot, the way the Velthari preferred it. Around the table sat his 7 generals, one from each species of the Dominion. Their intelligence officer, a thin reptilian creature with 6 fingers on each hand, presented the latest data on humanity. Their fleet consists of approximately 4,000 patrol-class vessels, the officer said, tapping his claws on a data screen. Their weapons are energy-based, Generation 4 standard. They have moderate shield technology. Their fastest ships use hyperspace lanes, same as ours, but their drives are slower. Population is spread across 42 systems, mostly concentrated in 7 core worlds. General Vreth, a massive armored beetle the size of a ground transport, let out a low rumble of amusement. They breed like pondworms and fight like frightened larvae. This will not be a war. This will be a harvest. The others laughed. Even Driel allowed himself a small clicking noise that passed for satisfaction among his kind. The data was solid. The numbers were clear. Humanity was small, slow, and weak. There was just one problem. The data was 400 years old, and no one in the room thought to question it. 800 million kilometers away, beneath the surface of Earth's moon, Lieutenant Beck Juno followed Chief Scientist Yoon So-hee down a corridor that should not have existed. He had been assigned to the flagship Bekho only 2 weeks ago, and Admiral Dohyun had personally ordered him to tour the Luna Vaults before the war began. "So you understand what you are fighting with," the Admiral had said, "and what you are fighting for." Sohee was a woman in her early 40s, with messy hair tied back in a knot, and dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had not slept well in about 15 years. She held a cup of coffee in one hand and a security badge in the other, and she walked fast enough that Juno had to jog to keep up. "How much do you know about what happened during the truce?" she asked, without looking back. "The basics," Juno said. "We stayed inside the soul boundary. We built colonies. We developed our technology at a normal pace." Sohee stopped walking and turned around. She looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student who has just said something incredibly wrong, but does not know it yet. "Normal pace," she repeated. "Right. Come with me." She pressed her badge against a door that was 2 meters thick and made of a metal Juno did not recognize. It opened without a sound. Behind it was a room the size of a small city. The first thing Sohee showed him was the Fold Space Drive. It sat in the center of a testing bay, a machine the size of a building, covered in panels that glowed with a faint blue light. Juno stared at it. 600 years ago, Sohee said, we cracked instantaneous point-to-point travel. Not hyperspace lanes, not slow jumps, instant. You step in here and you step out anywhere in the galaxy. No travel time, no detectable energy trail, nothing. Juno blinked. 600 years? But the galaxy thinks we still use hyperspace. Yes, Sohee said. That is the point. She moved on. The next section of the vault held what she called the stellar forges. Massive orbital platforms, currently folded into transport mode, that could be deployed around any star to harvest its energy directly. She explained that a single forge produced more power in one day than the entire Velthari warfleet used in a year. Earth had 47 of them. Juno said nothing. His mouth had gone dry. Then came the ghost fleet. Sohee led him to a viewing window that looked out into what appeared to be empty space. Just blackness and distant stars. She pressed a button. A light flickered, and suddenly the window showed something else. Ships, thousands of them. They hung in dimensional pockets, folds in space where matter could exist but could not be seen or detected. 12,000 warships, each one larger and more advanced than anything the Velthari had ever built, sitting in perfect silence, waiting. They have been here for 300 years, Sohee said quietly, ready to go at a moment's notice. No heat signature, no mass reading, invisible to every sensor the galaxy has ever invented. Juno gripped the railing of the viewing platform. His knuckles were white. What are they armed with? Sohee tilted her head. That is the next stop. The weapons bay was underground, sealed behind 4 additional security doors. Inside, holographic displays showed the specifications of what Sohee called Omega-class weapons. She explained each one in the same calm, flat voice a person might use to describe the weather. The first could collapse a star into a micro-black hole. The second could break apart the molecular bonds of all matter within an entire solar system. Every planet, every moon, every rock, reduced to dust in minutes. The third was her personal project, and she called it the off switch. It was a signal beam that could shut down any silicon or carbon-based neural network within its range. It worked on computers, it worked on ship systems, and it worked on living brains that used electrical signals, which meant nearly every known species in the galaxy. Range? Juno asked. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Current maximum is about 2 light minutes, Sohee said. We are working on extending it. She took a sip of her coffee as if she had just told him about a mildly interesting software update. His entire understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy had just been torn apart and rebuilt in the space of an hour. Does the rest of the galaxy know any of this? No, said a voice from behind them. Admiral Han Do-hyun stepped into the room, hands behind his back. He had been watching from the corridor. And that was always the plan. Do-hyun explained it simply. 1,000 years ago, when the truce was signed, humanity's leaders made a choice. They could grow openly, build their technology, expand their military, and show the galaxy what they were becoming. But that would have frightened the Velthari into attacking again before humanity was ready. Or it would have united every alien species against Earth out of fear. So instead, they chose the harder path. They hid. They let the galaxy believe humans were a small, quiet, unremarkable species sitting inside their little boundary, doing nothing special. And behind that mask, they built everything. Every human leader for the last 1,000 years has known about this, Do-hyun said. Every generation added to it. Every scientist, every engineer, every soldier who worked on these projects understood that they might never see them used. They built it anyway, because the truce was never going to last forever. Juno looked at the Admiral. Then he looked at Sohee. Then he looked back at the holographic display showing a weapon that could unmake a solar system. He was quiet for a long time. Why? He finally asked. If we wanted peace, if the whole point was to live quietly, why build all of this? Sohee set down her coffee. She looked at him with an expression that was not cold exactly, but was very far from warm. It was the face of a woman who had spent her entire life building things she hoped would never be used, knowing that they would be. Because peace was never the goal, Juno. Readiness was. The truce was always going to end. We just made sure that when it did, we would be the ones still standing. Somewhere far away, in the dark space beyond the Sol boundary, 500,000 Velthari warships were already moving. Their commanders were confident. Their soldiers were eager. Their intelligence told them that humanity was weak, slow, and afraid. Their intelligence was 1,000 years out of date. And they were about to find out what 1,000 years of quiet preparation looked like when the mask finally came off. The invasion began on a Tuesday. 500,000 Velthari warships crossed the Sol boundary in a formation that stretched across 12 light-years. It was the largest military operation in galactic history. Archon Dreel commanded from the center of the fleet, aboard his flagship, a dreadnought called the Fang of Worlds. He had spent 40 years planning this moment. His soldiers were trained, his ships were armed, and his confidence was absolute. Humanity would fall within days, and the galaxy would remember the Velthari as the species that finally cleaned up the mess they should have finished 1,000 years ago. The first sign that something was wrong came within 6 hours of crossing the boundary. There was nothing there. The outer human systems, mining colonies, research stations, patrol outposts, were empty. Not destroyed, not damaged, just empty. Lights still on, equipment still running, food still sitting on tables, but no people, no resistance. The Velthari scouts moved through system after system and found the same thing. Ghost towns floating in space. General Vreth, commanding the left wing of the fleet, sent a message to Dreel. The humans have fled. They abandoned their outer worlds. Cowards. Dreel said nothing. He stared at the tactical display. Something sat wrong in his gut, a feeling he did not recognize because he had never felt it before. It was doubt. He pushed it away and ordered the fleet to advance deeper. On the bridge of the Baiko, Earth's flagship, Admiral Han Do-hyun sat in his command chair with his legs crossed. Around him, officers worked their stations in calm silence. There was no panic, no shouting, no dramatic music. The bridge of the most powerful warship in human history sounded like a library on a slow afternoon. Bake Juno stood at the tactical station, his hands steady on the controls. He had not slept in 30 hours, but his eyes were sharp, on his screen. He could see the entire Velthari fleet, every ship, every formation, every movement, tracked in real time by a sensor network they did not know existed. "They have reached the midpoint," Juno reported. "Exactly where Director Unji predicted. Formation is spread wide. Supply ships are exposed in the rear." Do-hyun nodded slowly. He looked at the display for a long moment, then picked up a small communicator from the arm of his chair. He opened a channel that connected to every human warship in existence, all 12,000 of them, waiting in their dimensional pockets, invisible, silent, ready. He said 2 words. "Lights on." Across 40 star systems, simultaneously, the universe changed. The Ghost Fleet dropped out of its dimensional pockets and appeared in real space. 12,000 warships materialized in the middle, behind, and on every side of the Velthari formation. They were enormous, sleek black ships with no visible weapons ports, no engine glow, no markings. They looked like pieces of the void itself had come alive. The Velthari sensor arrays screamed. Every alarm on every ship went off at the same time. Officers stared at their screens and could not understand what they were seeing. Ships that had not existed 1 second ago now surrounded them in every direction. On the Fang of Worlds, Archondriel stood up from his command throne. His 4 black eyes moved across the tactical display. Red dots, human ships, covered the screen like a disease. They were everywhere. They were impossibly large, and they had appeared from nowhere. "Where did they come from?" he asked. His voice was still steady, but his mandibles had begun to tremble. No one answered him. No one could. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 6 hours. Human ships did not move the way ships were supposed to move. They used fold space drives, blinking in and out of existence like ghosts. A human destroyer would appear behind a Velthari cruiser, fire a single shot that passed through the cruiser's shields, as if they were made of air, and then vanish before the cruiser's weapons could even turn around. Then it would appear somewhere else and do it again. Juno commanded a squadron of 8 destroyers. He had trained on the fold space systems for 2 years, but using them in real combat was something else entirely. His squadron folded through space in tight coordinated jumps, appearing inside the Velthari formation, striking and folding away before the enemy could respond. At one point, he executed a maneuver that folded his entire squadron through the body of a Velthari carrier. They passed through it like light through glass. The carrier's internal structure could not survive the dimensional disruption. It collapsed in on itself, folding inward like paper being crushed by an invisible hand. 800 Velthari crew members died without understanding what had happened. Juno watched the carrier crumble on his screen and felt something cold settle in his chest. He pushed it down and gave the order for the next jump. Aboard a science vessel positioned safely behind the main fleet, Yoon So-hee watched the battle data on her screens with the focus of a surgeon. When Do-hyun gave her the signal, she activated the off switch for the first time in combat conditions. She targeted a cluster of 200 Velthari warships that had grouped together in a defensive formation. The beam was invisible. It made no sound. It traveled at light speed and hit all 200 ships within the same fraction of a second. Every system on every ship stopped. Engines died. Weapons went cold. Lights went dark. Navigation, communication, life support, all of it simply turned off, as if someone had pulled a plug from a wall. 200 warships became 200 metal boxes, drifting in the black. So-hee recorded the results on her datapad. Signal effectiveness, 100%. System disruption, total. She paused for a moment, her stylus hovering over the screen. Inside those ships, 140,000 living beings had just lost their air supply. She knew the math. They had approximately 4 hours before the oxygen ran out. She saved the file, closed the datapad, and said nothing. By the 6th hour, 30% of the Velthari invasion fleet was either destroyed or disabled. The remaining ships were in chaos. Formations had broken apart. Commanders were screaming at each other over open channels. Some ships tried to retreat and collided with others that were still trying to advance. The Velthari had not landed a single significant hit on a human vessel. Their weapons could not lock onto ships that were never in the same place for more than 2 seconds. Their shields meant nothing against weapons that ignored them entirely. Archon Driel stood on his bridge, surrounded by damage reports and casualty numbers that climbed faster than he could read them. The Fang of Worlds had not been hit. The human fleet seemed to be deliberately avoiding his flagship, but everything around him was falling apart. His officers looked at him with wide, desperate eyes. They wanted orders. They wanted a plan. They wanted their Archon to save them the way he had saved them in a dozen wars against lesser species. It was like watching an ocean rise and trying to fight it with a sword. Then a light blinked on his communication panel. A direct channel from the human flagship. Driel stared at it. Then, slowly, he opened it. Admiral Do-hyun's face appeared on the screen. He looked calm. He looked rested. He looked like a man who had not just spent 6 hours destroying the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Archon, Do-hyun said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. You were lied to. Not by us, by your own assumptions. You believed we were weak because that is what you wanted to believe. This war is already over. I am giving you a chance to understand that before more of your people die. He paused. Stand down. We can talk. For 10 long seconds, Driel stared at the human on his screen. His mandibles shook. His claws dug into the arms of his command throne hard enough to crack the metal. 1,000 years of Velthari pride burned in his chest like fire. He cut the channel without a word. Do-hyun watched the screen go dark. He sighed quietly, then turned to Juno. He will not surrender today, but he will. They always do, eventually. Across the neutral rim, on space stations and homeworlds and trading posts, billions of alien beings watched the battle footage that was spreading across every network. They watched human ships appear from nowhere. They watched Velthari warships crumble like toys. They watched an entire fleet go dark in an instant. And in the silence that followed, a diplomat from a small, peaceful trading species leaned toward her colleague and whispered something that would be quoted for centuries. What have they become? Nobody had an answer. The war lasted 96 hours, 4 days. That was all it took for 1,000 years of Velthari military pride to come apart like wet cloth. By the end of the 4th day, 60% of the Dominion's fleet was gone, destroyed, disabled, or captured. The remaining ships had pulled back beyond the Sol boundary in a retreat so chaotic that dozens of vessels crashed into each other trying to escape through the same hyperspace lanes. 3 of the 7 species in the Dominion broke away within hours of the ceasefire. They sent their own messages to Earth, each one more desperate than the last, each one saying the same thing. We did not want this war. We were forced. Please, do not destroy us. Archon Driel was removed from power by his own war council on the morning of the 5th day. The generals who had laughed about humanity breeding like pondworms now sat in silence as moderate leaders took their seats. Driel was taken to a holding cell aboard his own flagship. He went without a fight. There was no fight left in him. The galaxy exhaled. But the relief lasted only a moment before a new fear took its place. The neutral rim, the dozens of alien civilizations that had watched the war from the sidelines, had spent centuries thinking of the Velthari as the most dangerous military power in existence. Now they had watched that power get crushed in 4 days by a species everyone had dismissed as primitive. Emergency councils formed on every major world. Ambassadors spoke in hushed voices behind closed doors. The question on every table was the same. If humanity could do this to the Velthari, what could they do to us? Some species began quietly forming defensive alliances. Others sent secret messages to Earth, offering trade and friendship in voices that trembled with forced cheerfulness. A few military leaders on distant worlds dusted off old war plans and began updating them, not to attack Earth, but to figure out how to survive for more than a day if Earth ever turned its attention in their direction. On Titan, Admiral Han Do-hyun sat alone in his quarters aboard the Baekho and stared at the casualty report. The numbers were small on the human side. 12 ships damaged, no ships lost, 41 crew members injured, mostly minor, 0 human deaths. The Velthari side was different. 218,000 ships destroyed or disabled. Estimated casualties, over 6 million dead. Among them, 140,000 beings who had suffocated inside the ships that Yoon So-hee had shut down with the off switch. They had not been combatants in any meaningful sense by the time they died. They had been prisoners inside their own ships, sitting in the dark, breathing air that slowly ran out, waiting for a rescue that never came. Do-hyun closed the report and pressed his hands against his face. He stayed like that for a long time. When the War Council met the next morning, the debate was fierce. Earth's government had sent representatives, politicians, diplomats, military advisors, and they did not agree on anything. The Hawks spoke first. They wanted to press forward. The Velthari Dominion was broken. Its fleet was gone. Its species was splitting apart. This was the moment to push into Velthari space, seize territory, dismantle their military permanently, and establish humanity as the dominant force in the galaxy. "We will never have this chance again," said one senator, a sharp-faced woman with cold eyes. "If we stop now, they will rebuild. They will come back. We need to finish this." The Doves disagreed. They wanted an immediate withdrawal to pre-war boundaries. The war was defensive, they argued. Humanity had proven its point. Going further would turn every species in the galaxy against them. "We are not conquerors," said a diplomat with tired eyes. "The moment we start acting like it, we become exactly what the Velthari were." Do-hyun listened to both sides. He did not speak. When the room finally went quiet, he stood and walked out without a word. The council members exchanged confused looks, but no one followed him. He went to the communications center and placed a private call to Mars. Kwon Tae-soon answered from his porch, as always. The old general was drinking tea and watching the sunset paint the Martian sky in shades of orange and purple. He did not look surprised to see Do-hyun's face on his screen. "You look terrible," Tae-soon said. "I need your advice," Do-hyun replied. "Then ask." Do-hyun told him about the debate. The Hawks and the Doves, the pressure from both sides, the weight of a decision that would shape the future of not just humanity, but every living species in the galaxy. Tae-soon listened without interrupting. When Do-hyun finished, the old man was quiet for a while. Then he told a story. When the truce was signed 1,000 years ago, our leaders wanted to keep fighting. We had taken heavy losses, but we were angry and we were stubborn. The Velthari offered peace, and half of our command wanted to reject it. They said if we stopped now, the aliens would think we were weak. They said we needed to push forward and show strength. He paused. But a few voices said something different. They said that being strong enough to win is not the hard part. Being wise enough to know what to do after winning, that is the part that breaks empires. They chose restraint. And they used those 1,000 years to build something the galaxy has never seen before. He looked directly into the camera. "Do not waste what they built, Do-hyun. The weapons are the least important part of our inheritance. The restraint is what matters." Do-hyun nodded slowly. "Thank you, old man." "Go make the right choice," Tae-soon said. "And get some sleep. You really do look terrible." Meanwhile, in a quiet lab aboard the science vessel, Yoon So-hee sat on the floor of her quarters, with her back against the wall, and her arms wrapped around her knees. She had reviewed the data from the off switch 17 times. Each time, the numbers were the same. 200 ships disabled. 140,000 dead. The weapon had worked exactly as designed. Every system shut down. Every circuit went dark. Every living thing inside those ships had been left in a sealed metal box, with no air, no heat, and no way out. She had designed the weapon knowing this would happen. She had authorized its use knowing this would happen. And she would authorize it again if she had to, because the alternative, letting those 200 ships continue fighting, would have cost more lives on both sides. But knowing that she had made the right choice and feeling good about it were two completely different things. The math was clean. Her conscience was not. A knock came at her door. She did not answer. The door opened anyway, and Bake Juno stepped inside. He looked at her sitting on the floor, and he did not ask if she was okay. He did not offer comfort or empty words. He just sat down beside her, leaned his head back against the wall, and stayed there. They sat together in silence for a long time. Sometimes, that is all a person can offer. And sometimes, it is enough. The next day, Admiral Do-hyun addressed the galaxy. His broadcast went out on every channel, in every language, to every species that was listening. And every species was listening. He stood on the bridge of the Beko, in his slightly wrinkled uniform, with his slightly crooked rank pins. And he spoke plainly. We spent 1,000 years preparing for a war we hoped would never come. It came. It is nearly over. We have no interest in conquering the Dominion's territory. We have no interest in ruling anyone. What we want is what we have always wanted, to be left alone to grow, to learn, and to build. He paused, and his eyes hardened, just slightly. But I want to be clear about one thing. The next species that mistakes our patience for weakness will not receive a second chance to learn the difference. Across the galaxy, billions of beings sat in silence and tried to understand what they had just heard. It was not a threat, exactly. It was not a promise of peace, exactly. It was something in between, a statement from a species that had the power to end civilizations and had chosen, for now, not to. Director No Unji watched the broadcast from her office and allowed herself a small, rare smile. Not bad, she said to no one in particular. Not bad at all. On Mars, Kwon Tae-san watched from his porch, nodded once, and went back to his tea. And aboard the Beko, Do-hyun walked off the bridge, went to his quarters, and slept for 14 hours straight. It was the first time he had slept well in a very long time. The Accord of Titan began on a cold morning. Though cold on Titan meant something different now than it had 1,000 years ago. Human engineers had long ago wrapped Saturn's moon in a climate shell. A thin, invisible layer of technology that held warmth and air against the surface like a blanket. The sky above was amber and gold, and the buildings of the United Solar Command rose from the ice fields like monuments carved from steel and light. Every major species in the galaxy sent representatives. Over 200 delegations arrived in the span of a single week, their ships filling the orbital stations above Titan until the sky looked crowded with metal stars. Most of the alien diplomats had never set foot in human space. Most had spent their entire lives hearing stories about humanity, a small, quiet species locked away behind its boundary. Now they were walking through the corridors of the most powerful civilization in the known galaxy. And nothing looked the way they expected. They expected military bases. They found gardens. Enormous green spaces filled with trees and flowers from a dozen terraformed worlds, stretching across the surface of Titan in every direction. They expected soldiers. They found children. Human children running through low-gravity parks, laughing and tumbling through the air in slow, graceful arcs. They expected cold steel and weapon systems. They found art. Murals painted on the sides of buildings, sculptures standing in public squares, music drifting from open windows. An ambassador from the neutral rim, a tall being with translucent skin and large dark eyes, stood in the entrance hall of the conference center and watched a group of human musicians perform a symphony. The music was unlike anything she had heard. Layered, complex, full of emotion that she could not name, but could feel somewhere deep inside her chest. Halfway through the performance, she began to cry. She did not try to hide it. A journalist found her afterward and asked for a comment. She wiped her eyes and said, "We prepared ourselves to meet conquerors. We found artists. I do not know which is more frightening." The conference itself was difficult. Trust does not appear overnight, especially not after a war. The Velthari sent a new delegation, younger leaders, moderates who had opposed the invasion and survived the political collapse that followed. Among them was a diplomat named T-Vel, a slender insectoid woman with careful movements and intelligent eyes. She was one of the few Velthari who had publicly argued against the war before it began, and she had nearly been executed for it. Now, she sat at the table, representing a broken dominion, carrying the weight of her species on her thin shoulders. During a break in the negotiations, she walked through one of Titan's garden corridors and found Bake Juno standing by a window, looking out at the amber sky. She recognized him from the intelligence files, the young tactical officer who had led the squadron that folded through a Velthari carrier. The man who had killed 800 of her people in a single maneuver. She almost walked away. Instead, she walked toward him. "You are Lieutenant Bake," she said. Juno turned. His face showed a moment of surprise, then something more complicated. He nodded. They stood together in silence for a while, watching the light move across the ice fields. Then, T-Vel spoke again. "I have been trying to understand your species," she said. "You had the power to destroy us completely. You still do, but you stopped. You offered peace. My people would not have done the same." She paused. "Why?" Juno thought about it for a long time. He thought about the carrier that had folded in on itself. He thought about the silence in Sohi's lab. He thought about Dohyun's tired eyes and Taesun's quiet words and 1,000 years of building weapons that were meant to never be used. "Because most of us did not want this war either," he said. "We built all of those weapons because we were afraid. 1,000 years of fear does strange things to a species. It makes you very good at preparing for the worst, but it does not make you want the worst to happen." T-Vel studied his face with her dark, compound eyes. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Perhaps we are not so different after all." Juno smiled, but it was a sad smile. And honestly, that is the terrifying part. Inside the conference hall, Yoon So-hee stood before the full assembly and made a proposal that shocked everyone in the room, including several members of her own delegation. She proposed that the Omega-class weapons, the Star Killers, the Molecular Disruptors, the Off-Switch, be placed under the control of a joint galactic oversight council. Not a human council, a shared one, with representatives from every major species, including the Velthari. The reaction was immediate. Earth's military commanders objected fiercely. Giving away control of their most powerful weapons was madness, they argued. It would make humanity vulnerable. It would undo everything they had built. So he stood at the podium and waited for the noise to die down. Then she spoke, and her voice was steady. "If we keep these weapons to ourselves, we become exactly what the Velthari were, a species that rules through fear. I did not build these things so that we could become the next dominion. I built them so that we could survive. We have survived. Now we have to decide what kind of survival is worth having." The debate lasted 3 days. Votes were taken, Arguments were made, threats were whispered in corridors. In the end, the proposal passed by a single vote. Admiral Han Do-hyun cast the deciding vote. He did it without hesitation, and when reporters asked him why, he said simply, because she was right. In the weeks that followed, director No Eun-ji did something that no one asked her to do and no one knew about. She dismantled 60% of her spy network across Velthari space. Hundreds of biosynthetic organisms that had been gathering intelligence for centuries were quietly deactivated and dissolved. It was the largest voluntary surrender of intelligence capability in human history, and she told no one except her deputy, a quiet man named Shin Woo-jin. Why would you do this? We spent centuries building that network. Eun-ji looked out the window of her office at the amber sky. Because trust has to start somewhere, and it might as well start with the people who can afford to take the risk. Woo-jin shook his head slowly. And if they betray that trust? Eun-ji smiled. It was not a warm smile, but it was not a cold one either. Then we still have the other 40%. I am hopeful, Woo-jin. I am not stupid. On Mars, Kwon Tae-soon returned to his house and his garden and his quiet life. The galaxy was changing, and he was content to watch it change from his porch, with a cup of tea in his hand. One afternoon, about a month after the accord was signed, he noticed movement at the edge of his property. A family had moved into the empty house down the road. Refugees from the Dominion's collapse relocated to Mars as part of the new resettlement program. A mated pair and 3 children, small insectoid beings no taller than Tae-sun's knee, with wide eyes and quick, nervous movements. The youngest child wandered away from its parents one afternoon and ended up in Tae-sun's garden. It stood among the tomato plants and stared up at the old man with huge dark eyes. Its antennae twitched with what Tae-sun's translator identified as a mix of curiosity and fear. Tae-sun looked at the child for a long moment. He saw the mandibles, the segmented limbs, the compound eyes. He saw the face of a species that had tried to destroy his people twice. He saw a child standing in his garden, small and scared and far from home. He reached up to his fruit tree, pulled down a ripe pear, and held it out. The child looked at the fruit. Then it looked at Tae-sun. Then very carefully it reached out with both small hands and took it. A sound came from its throat, soft and clicking, that the translator rendered as, "Thank you." Tae-sun nodded. "You are welcome, little one. Welcome to the neighborhood." The child's parents appeared a moment later, panicked and apologetic. Tae-sun waved away their apologies and invited them for tea. They sat on his porch awkwardly, holding cups that were too big for their hands, and they talked about gardens and weather and the color of the Martian sky. It was not a deep conversation. It was not a meaningful political act. It was just neighbors being neighbors. And somehow, that was enough. On the bridge of the Baiko, orbiting high above Titan, Admiral Han Do-hyun stood alone at the observation window for the last time before the ship returned to his home port. Earth glowed blue in the far distance, a tiny jewel against the black. The accord had been signed. The weapons were being transferred. The spy networks were being reduced. A new truce was in place, though this time it was not between 2 species, but among all of them. It was fragile. He knew that. It might not last 100 years, let alone 1,000. The galaxy was full of fear and old wounds and species that did not trust each other. But it was a start, and sometimes a start was all you needed. A voice crackled over the bridge speaker. "Admiral, incoming message from the Neutral Rim Coalition." Do-hyun raised an eyebrow. "What do they want?" "They want to discuss cultural exchange programs, sir. Music, art, science. They are asking if we are interested." Do-hyun laughed. It was a real laugh, full and warm and free, the kind he had not allowed himself in months. It echoed across the empty bridge and out into the silence of space, where no one could hear it, but where it mattered anyway. Tell them all, yes. He stood at the window a moment longer, watching Earth glow blue against the dark. Then he turned, straightened his slightly crooked rank pins, and walked off the bridge to start the long, uncertain, beautiful work of building something that had never existed before in the history of the galaxy. Not a truce, not a peace built on fear, but a peace built on choice, fragile, imperfect, and worth every risk it would take to keep it alive.